She was accused of surrounding herself with flatterers and hangers-on, and of disposing of her own newborn child so she could then pin the crime on her chief rival and drive her from the court stage. People said she had the heart of a snake and the soul of a wolf, and that she was ready to take the lives of even her closest relatives to preserve power. She entered the harem of one of the greatest emperors in Chinese history at the age of 14. Somehow, she managed to rise from a mid-rank concubine to the only ruling empress in the history of the Middle Kingdom. Moreover, she kept hold of the reins of government for many years afterward. This is what we'll talk about today, about this fascinating and contradictory woman. You probably know that for many centuries in China, as well as in India and other parts of the world, girls were welcomed with less enthusiasm than boys, so their names generally attracted little interest. However, we're not done with names yet. Even before Wu Zetian became a noted court figure, Emperor Taizong, known in Russian transliteration as Li Shimin, gave her the nickname Mei, where Wu is the name of the clan to which Wu Zetian belonged, and Mei is an adjective meaning beautiful, charming, enchanting. Over her lifetime, Wu Zetian held a vast number of titles and ranks. I don't think it makes sense to list them all. Doing so would take too long and likely not interest everyone. So don't be surprised if, in some article or story, you see Wu Zetian under a completely different name. All right, enough preliminaries. Let's turn to our heroine's biography. We don't know her exact birth date, but historians agree it was most likely the year 624 CE, that is, the 7th century. In that year, people in Tang-era China witnessed a total solar eclipse. If we indulge in a bit of esoteric musing, or in other words, let our imagination run, we might invent the backstory that Wu Zetian was destined to eclipse the sun itself. Wu Zetian came from a fairly noble and well-to-do family, contrary to the common notion that emperors' harems drew only poor girls who had no other way to earn a living than serving the emperor. Such girls certainly existed, but for the most part these were young ladies of noble origin. That's because, in selecting a girl for the harem, great attention was paid to her lineage. The whole casting for the imperial court was more like a cat or dog show. The prospective concubine's pedigree was assessed, as were her health, appearance, which perhaps should be listed first, erudition, education, childbearing potential, which probably also belongs at the top, and creative talents, how beautifully she could, for example, paint, sing, or play traditional Chinese instruments. And even if you met all of the above criteria, that did not guarantee entry into the harem, since the emperor always had the final word. The emperor's mother also played no small role in choosing concubines. Summing up, girls from poor, unpropertied families did appear in harems, but they had fewer rights. If such women bore children by the emperor, those children were considered illegitimate. Primary attention, however, was given to girls from noble families. An interesting fact, harems in China were abolished at the legal level only in 1949, when the Chinese Communist Party came to power. But let's return to our heroine. Wu Zetian came from a fairly noble and well-off family. Her mother was from the Yan line, a branch of another dynasty called the Sui, which ruled China for a relatively short time. As for Wu Zetian's father, sources differ. Some say he worked, speaking in modern terms, in the timber business, felling trees, to put it very simply. Other sources say he held a certain post at court. Most likely, Wu Zetian's parents secretly cherished the hope of placing her in the imperial harem, and doing so in such a way that she would eventually win the emperor's heart, because her father and mother devoted considerable attention and resources to her education, which in 6th century China was rare. Girls' education received little attention, because in those years a girl was considered more of a burden, and investing much effort, time, care, and money in her education was seen as not quite proper or worthwhile. After all, she would be married off and might never be seen again. That attitude endured for many centuries, naturally well after the 6th century too. Even in the 20th century, despite Mao Zedong's famous line that women hold up half the sky, girls were still treated with far more neglect than boys, even after the Communist Party came to power. Wu Zetian's case was somewhat different, because her parents wanted their daughter to be well-read and erudite, and they did everything to ensure she received a good education. As a result, Wu Zetian mastered not only the feminine accomplishments like singing and painting, but also, if the sources are to be believed, became quite knowledgeable in politics and statecraft. Evidently, her parents' efforts were not in vain, because at the age of 14, Wu Zetian entered the harem of Emperor Taizong of the Tang Dynasty, also known as Li Shimin, who is regarded as one of the greatest emperors in Chinese history. To us today, sending one's own 14-year-old daughter to the emperor's harem and rejoicing that she passed the selection seems utterly horrific. But in 6th century China, this was considered highly honorable. In short, Wu Zetian entered Emperor Taizong's harem and became something like his personal secretary, which, on the one hand, allowed her to continue her education, and on the other, gave her access to the inner workings of the imperial household. In effect, she became a concubine secretary. In short, she had hit the jackpot. Such is the harsh truth of life. A connection with a powerful, authoritative man like the emperor, who sat atop the entire pyramid of power, promised advancement not only for the girl herself, but also for her family. For parents, giving a daughter to the harem in hopes that she would someday win the emperor's heart was a powerful investment in their future happiness. According to some sources, Wu Zetian entered the harem thanks to her father, who supposedly secured a place for her there. According to another version, she passed the full selection, competing on equal footing with the other candidates. In any case, she soon received the nickname Mei, meaning the beautiful girl of the Wu clan, as well as the title or rank of concubine that in Chinese is pronounced Chai Zhen. This was an official title in the harem system of imperial China. It was somewhere in the middle, perhaps closer to the lower end. The word Chai Zhen literally means a talented person, that is, a girl with certain artistic gifts. There were an enormous number of titles in the imperial harem. If you're interested in Chinese history or listen to my podcast on the history and evolution of beauty in China, you'll know one of them, Gui Fei. You'll recognize it from the legend, which I also mentioned in the podcast, of young Gui Fei, one of the 4 great beauties of China. The title Gui Fei, to put it very simply, was given to the top concubine, the most favored, honored one. Naturally, a very young 14-year-old Wu Zetian could not dream of such a rank. It was impossible to enter the harem and immediately be named Gui Fei. Still, Chai Zhen was a quite respectable position in the harem, and the nickname Mei indicated that she was not only gifted but also very beautiful. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly what Wu Zetian looked like, not only when she was in the emperor's harem, but even at the height of her courtly fame. Chinese historians still argue about the authenticity of her portraits. Even without knowing her exact appearance, we can rely on the beauty standards of China during the Tang Dynasty. Many remarked that in her youth, Wu Zetian was very beautiful, which suggests she conformed to those standards. So what was prized in girls in 7th century China under the Tang? As in present-day China, pale, porcelain-smooth skin, almond-shaped eyes, long, black, thick, healthy hair, and a round face. In contrast with today's China, however, a moderately plump figure, or even pronounced curves, was admired. For example, the young Gui Fei mentioned above, one of China's 4 great beauties, immortalized not only in history but also in many legends, was by no means thin. She lived in the 7th century and had a voluptuous, alluring figure. We have reason to think that when Wu Zetian stood center stage at court, she too was not slender, certainly not as thin as actress Fan Bingbing, who played her in the 2014 series The Empress of China. Today, the PRC has a long-standing cult of thinness, but in the 7th century the demands on the female figure were different. Back to Wu Zetian's life and character. To someone unfamiliar with the hardships of court life, it may seem that once she entered the harem and won Emperor Taizong's heart, she strode swiftly toward exaltation and became empress. Of course, that's not how it was. Any imperial court is, frankly, a nest of vipers, a brutally competitive environment, and those who prosper in it are often people of flexible principles who long ago made peace with their consciences. Because Wu Zetian initially held a minor position in the harem, and because Emperor Taizong did not fall in love with her at first sight, did not throw himself at her lotus feet and lay the wealth of China before her, some historians are convinced Wu Zetian nonetheless had intimate relations with the emperor. The emperor was 40 at the time, she was 14. Some say she had no such relations, she was too young. Others claim Wu Zetian had an affair, as it were, both with Emperor Taizong and with his son Li Ji. The view that Wu Zetian was at once her father's concubine and his son's is fairly widespread among modern historians, and, remarkably enough, it was this son, Li Ji, who became Emperor of China after Taizong's death in 649. Taizong, incidentally, had 14 sons. Wu Zetian herself was 25 when the emperor died. Many might think, of course, she ensnared the son. The emperor died and his son then made Wu Zetian empress. But again, that's not how it happened. After the emperor's death, by tradition, Wu Zetian was sent to a Buddhist convent, where she was supposed to spend the rest of her days. Had she borne the late emperor a child, she would have been kept at court. But she had no children by him, so she was dispatched to a nunnery. The monastery was called Gan Ying, meaning perception or karmic response. Despite the fact that she was supposed to spend the rest of her life there, she somehow left it very quickly. Some historians claim she was there only a week, as if she had gone on a resort holiday. Others say she never actually left the court residence, and the monastery was a mere formality. In any case, how did she, against tradition, manage not to remain in the convent? One version holds that during Taizong's funeral, Wu Zetian once again caught the eye of his son Li Ji, who upon ascending the throne became known as Gaozong. I say once again because most historians agree that before Taizong's death, Wu Zetian already had close relations with his son. In the spirit of a romantic costume drama, one might imagine Emperor Gaozong rekindling his passion for his father's concubine and deciding to bring her back to court. But that's not exactly how it went. According to this version, it was Gaozong's own wife, Empress Wang, who prompted him to bring Wu Zetian back. Why bring this concubine back to her husband's court? Because Empress Wang was embroiled in a rivalry with Gaozong's chief concubine, Xiao Shufei. Xiao Shufei, it is said, and likely true, fought fiercely for the emperor's attention. I'll explain later why I think this version is plausible. Empress Wang disliked Xiao Shufei's influence and supposedly decided to distract the emperor from her by using Wu Zetian. She wanted to bring the beauty back to court so the emperor would turn from Xiao Shufei and focus on Wu Zetian. Why did Empress Wang think this could work? Because sadly she was childless. She could not bear the emperor children, her chief duty. But Xiao Shufei could. She bore Emperor Gaozong 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. Naturally, her standing at court soared. Since Gaozong, a very young emperor succeeding his great father, had no legitimate children by his wife, he began thinking more and more about elevating Xiao Shufei, who had given him 3 children, legitimizing them, and pushing Empress Wang into the background. The empress, already deeply wounded by her inability to bear children, was understandably displeased. She decided to rid herself of her rival by refocusing the emperor's attention on the youthful beauty Wu Zetian and bringing her back from the convent. By this account, the plan seems bizarre. Bring one of the emperor's most beautiful concubines back to the harem so your husband will start an affair with her and forget the other beautiful, fertile one. Perhaps Empress Wang believed herself more experienced in court intrigue. The emperor would amuse himself with Wu Zetian, forget Xiao Shufei, and then she, the empress, would get rid of Wu Zetian by other means. But the empress's plan, ingenious and supposedly as reliable as a Swiss watch, did not come to pass. Wu Zetian, as you've probably guessed, won the emperor's heart to such a degree that he forgot both women vying for his attention, his wife and Xiao Shufei alike. We should remember, though, that this whole tangle of plot lines, how Wu Zetian returned from the Buddhist temple to the imperial palace, is only one version of her life story. There is another, more workable and even more widespread one, that Emperor Gaozong became emperor largely thanks to Wu Zetian. We should linger here because without Gaozong, known for his pliability and regarded by some historians as weak-willed and also plagued by ill health, Wu Zetian might never have become empress, the first and only female sovereign in China's history. While Taizong, the emperor who took Wu Zetian into his harem, was still alive, he doubted his son's ability to rule the vast empire. Taizong had 14 sons, and Gaozong was not the eldest. His elder brothers, Li Chengqian and Li Ji, entered into a plot against their father, driven by a thirst for power, and Taizong lost all trust in them. Compared to his ambitious brothers, Gaozong, then still Li Zhi, seemed more reasonable and inspired greater confidence in his father. Some historians argue that the rise of this soft prince occurred thanks to two women, his wife, Empress Wang, and Wu Zetian. This is why some scholars believe Wu Zetian had intimate relations with both emperors, Taizong and his son Gaozong. With access to both, Wu Zetian promoted Gaozong, understanding that through him she could reach high standing at court and possibly become empress. Ambitious and determined, Wu Zetian realized she could influence both the aging Taizong and the pliant Gaozong, and she seized the opportunity. It's thought that to this end, she first won the confidence of Empress Wang, who could not bear children and was under pressure at court, especially from Xiao Shufei, who had borne the emperor heirs. With an analytical mind and keen perception, Wu Zetian quickly identified the weak points in the court struggle: Empress Wang's childlessness and Gaozong's pliancy, softness, and fragile health. The prevailing theory holds that while Taizong was alive, Wu Zetian supported Empress Wang, consoled her, and became a close friend, helping to advance Gaozong's candidacy as heir. Once Gaozong became emperor, Wu Zetian swiftly eliminated her main rivals, Empress Wang and the concubine Xiao Shufei. Removing Xiao Shufei was relatively simple. Empress Wang was a harder case. One version says Wu Zetian's close relations with palace servants helped. Empress Wang, it is reported, treated her allies disdainfully and opportunistically, whereas Wu Zetian respected and generously rewarded hers, winning over not only influential courtiers, but also ordinary servants. This strategy allowed Wu Zetian to cultivate ties with the powerful and also to benefit from the strength of weak ties, a concept described by Charles Duhigg. Though unknown in the 7th century, Wu Zetian, unlike Empress Wang, understood the value of connections not only with big players, but also with middle and lower-ranking courtiers and servants. When Empress Wang and Xiao Shufei realized the fight against them had begun, they joined forces to try to get rid of Wu Zetian, but failed. There is a story that soon after the hostility began, Wu Zetian gave birth to a daughter who soon died, and Wu Zetian accused Empress Wang of the murder. Since Empress Wang had no alibi, she was accused of killing the infant out of jealousy. The story is horrific not only because a child died, but also because some sources claim Wu Zetian herself killed her baby to topple her chief rival. It's possible the child died naturally due to poor ventilation and coal heating in the imperial apartments, which could have caused sudden infant death syndrome or smoke poisoning. In any case, Had Empress Wang enjoyed more trusting relations with palace servants, she might have avoided such a stain on her reputation. As for the claim that Wu Zetian killed her own child, that legend surfaced centuries later and may have been fabricated to blacken her name. Nevertheless, the first blow against Empress Wang had been struck. Wu Zetian went on to accuse the Empress and her mother of witchcraft, constantly reminding the emperor of his wife's childlessness. Events moved quickly. Wu Zetian unseated Empress Wang, built a coalition of loyal officials, became Empress herself, and ordered the arrest of the former Empress and Xiao Shufei. According to some accounts, both women were given 100 blows with a staff, their hands and feet were cut off, and their bodies placed in vats of wine. One legend says that in her fury, Xiao Shufei vowed to be reborn as a cat and strangle Wu Zetian, after which Wu Zetian banned cats in the palace. After carrying out this brutal order, Wu Zetian was haunted by nightmares of her rival's spirits and asked her husband to move to a new residence. It's important to remember, however, that this story appeared many years after Wu Zetian's death and may have been concocted to vilify her, especially because she was a woman on the throne. Smearing rulers is common practice, and history knows many such cases. Modern historians actively seek to cleanse Wu Zetian's image of myths and legends. For example, the Chinese archaeologist Zhang Zhongling argues that Wu Zetian's reputation was unjustly tarnished. Unearthed artifacts indicate that her reign marked a flowering of female emancipation. Figurines of women on horseback and in men's clothing suggest they could move about freely, work in traditionally male professions, hunt, and travel. The English scholar Tony Eckfeld adds that Wu Zetian's reign also saw a boom in trade. Analysis of women's jewelry indicates that gemstones and metals came from distant regions such as Uzbekistan, India, Iran, and Sri Lanka. The abundance of jewelry points to flourishing trade, national wealth, and a blossoming of art and architecture. Wu Zetian's palace residence, Damingong, was the largest palace complex in the world at the time. The city of Chang'an, capital of the Tang Dynasty, could boast a population approaching 1 million in the 6th–8th centuries, far more than London, Paris, or Florence of that era. Chang'an was the most populous city in the world, the hub of the Silk Road, and a cosmopolitan metropolis of its time, home to around 25,000 foreigners, mostly merchants and craftsmen. Wu Zetian paid great attention to commerce, establishing military posts to protect traders from bandits. She also devoted much effort to supporting and spreading Buddhism, understanding that this would help her secure the followers' support and elevate her status. Despite the image of a cruel ruler, Wu Zetian cared about her people's welfare. Under her, the rice storage system was improved so grain could be kept for up to 10 years and used in the event of a poor harvest. Wu Zetian understood that it's easier to govern when the army and subjects are well fed. As a woman from a not-so-high-ranking family, she could not always rely on the top aristocracy, which was hostile to her. She therefore brought commoners into the bureaucracy and enacted laws granting women greater freedoms, including the right to education, freedom of movement, divorce, and refusal of marriage. Wu Zetian appointed the world's first female prime minister, her secretary and advisor Shangguan Wan'er, who sadly was killed in a coup shortly after Wu Zetian's death. Wu Zetian's rule was marked by the expansion of Chinese territory in Central Asia and the conclusion of cooperative treaties with other states. While such a flattering portrait may cast doubt on her cruelty, it's impossible to deny that at that time it was extraordinarily difficult for a woman to retain power, especially for more than 50 years, from 650 to 705. This span includes the periods when she ruled alongside her husband, then in place of one son, then another, and finally as sovereign in her own right. Speaking of Wu Zetian's sons, it's worth noting that at first, she effectively governed the country by acting for one son, Zhongzong, and then for another, Ruizong. She later forced the latter to abdicate so that she could concentrate power entirely in her own hands and enjoy the comforts she believed she had earned. Throughout this period, Wu Zetian ruthlessly and methodically eliminated anyone who could become her rival, including the wife of her son Zhongzong, Empress Wei. This woman, as it turned out, was very much like Wu Zetian herself, equally ambitious, determined, cold-blooded, and domineering. She didn't just keep her husband Zhongzong under her thumb, she essentially ruled through him. Unsurprisingly, two such strong personalities, Wu Zetian and her daughter-in-law Empress Wei, soon clashed in a struggle for power. Empress Wei was exiled from the palace. However, she managed to return, and her husband Zhongzong once again took the throne, having, with the help of close allies, overthrown his own mother. We'll talk more about that. His wife, Empress Wei, then began to rule the empire, much as her mother-in-law Wu Zetian had once ruled in place of her husband, Emperor Taizong. Paradoxically, it was precisely Wu Zetian's manic determination to keep all power and the lack of a worthy successor that led to her downfall. At the age of 81, an impressive age for the 7th century, she was deposed by her own son, Zhongzong. Contributing to this outcome was her later, and in the courtiers' view, unwarranted favoritism toward the so-called Zhang brothers. Thanks to the Empress's favor, these brothers shot from poverty to the heights of power. Some say both were Wu Zetian's lovers, first one, then the other, with the second supposedly surpassing the first. Be that as it may, their meteoric rise on the court stage aroused suspicion and then open hatred from the Chinese aristocracy. Certain nobles decided that the best way to get rid of the Zhang brothers was to remove Wu Zetian herself. Had she not been so elderly, had her health not begun to fail, she might well have found a way out of the crisis and kept power. But when you're over 80, it becomes extremely hard to wage palace intrigues and fight fierce battles. And so, in 705, Wu Zetian was removed from power. In the same year, the Zhou dynasty, which she had founded in 690 with the hope, perhaps, of a long life, came to an end. It had lasted only 15 years, from 690 to 705. It was effectively abolished when her son Zhongzong of the Tang Dynasty came to the throne. Thus, the short-lived Zhou gave way once more to the Tang. Ironically, historians say that the country was again effectively governed not by Zhongzong, the new emperor, but by his wife, Empress Wei, much as Wu Zetian had once ruled in place of Emperor Taizong. But Empress Wei failed to surpass her formidable mother-in-law. She and her daughter were killed just 5 years later in a bloody coup organized by one of Wu Zetian's grandsons, Li Longji. Sadly, even after Wu Zetian's death, upheavals continued to shake the imperial palace. The only empress in China's history never found a worthy successor. Perhaps, given her character and years of exhausting struggle for power, Wu Zetian simply did not want to, and could not, share it with anyone. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe. There are more stories about powerful women to come.